For more, we're now joined by Nadia Khoury, who is the head of delegation in Myanmar from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Now, Nadia, how have the floods affected communities and infrastructure in the most impacted areas? Can you paint a picture of the damage caused by the floods for us?
Sure, and thank you again for having me. So what we've seen in the past week is that an extremely heavy amount of rainfall has come in a short time, flooding houses, flooding agricultural crops, destroying infrastructure, and it has affected what we estimate to be about 20% of the townships in the whole country. So it's absolutely huge. An estimated 630,000 people have been affected. And as the communications are increasingly difficult, as you imagine, a lot of the communications infrastructure has been destroyed. We are getting, as the days pass, a clearer picture of the vast amount of damages. We know that some close to 200 or 300,000 people have already been evacuated from their homes. And we know that there's a huge amount of needs now for these populations. The first immediate need is water, food, shelter, and safety. But many of them have lost their homes. Many of them had to be rescued from rooftops, and there will be a long journey for those populations to recover.
And of course, all of this is complicated, of course, by the ongoing conflict in Myanmar. How has it exacerbated the situation caused by the floods?
That's right. We have an already very vulnerable population. Over 3 million people are estimated to have been displaced in Myanmar since the start of the year. And we now see that this is a compounded effect for these populations who are already extremely needy. It's very challenging for those populations at the moment, and they have needs in terms of access to health, which was already restricted, access to clean water, access to a shelter, and access to recovery for their livelihoods. Many of them have lost their cattle, many of them have lost their agricultural lands, many have lost sources of tourism, and we've seen areas also in the capital city affected. So it's compounding the impact for this population, which has already been suffering through multiple shocks over the past few years.
And we know also that a third of the population is now in need of aid. But how has the Myanmar government responded to the floods? What role are they playing in relief efforts here?
The State Administration Council, according to reports by the state media, has been carrying out evacuations of people who have been stranded. They have opened temporary relief centers, and they have been engaged in the immediate assistance to populations that they're able to reach. There are so many needs that there is also a lot of efforts from local actors, such as the Myanmar Red Cross, with whom we work very closely. Other national societies are also supporting, and other organizations. There's quite a lot of amount of local support from local communities. The amount of generosity is very impressive in terms of what communities are willing to contribute to their neighbors, and more will be needed. So we are hoping to launch an emergency appeal for additional assistance to be carried out through the Myanmar Red Cross, our main partner in country, for those early response needs that I've already mentioned, as well as assistance over the next 3 to 6 months and even up to the next year.
Now, Nadia, you're on the ground right now. Can you tell us how humanitarian organizations, such as the ones you're coordinating the efforts for, how is that happening in such a complex environment, especially with this ongoing conflict? What are some challenges you're facing?
One of the key challenges is already communication challenges. There is so much happening and so much information coming from different areas. It's difficult at this stage to paint a picture. And that's why at the moment we're speaking about estimates of people affected. Humanitarian organizations are working together to do identifications of needs and damages so that they can coordinate their response. We have, as a humanitarian system, coordination mechanisms, and we are able to draw on the expertise of many different humanitarian organizations, such as some of the UN organizations. As part of the Red Cross family, we, of course, coordinate very closely with the International Committee of the Red Cross, who have an expertise for conflict-affected areas. And it's also extremely important for the international organizations to work very closely with the local organizations. So they're the ones who have a lot of the local community knowledge, will be able to access the communities who are the most affected and the ones on which we rely on very closely. Now, of course, as humanitarian organizations, our mandate is to help whoever needs assistance wherever they are. And we are very, very careful and dedicated to that amount of impartiality. So our key focus is assisting people without any discrimination wherever we're able to reach them.
And speaking of the work that you're doing as well, what are some of the logistical and perhaps even security challenges that are being faced by the aid workers in these affected regions, and how are you overcoming them?
Well, in terms of logistics, of course, roadways have been impacted, telecommunications have been impacted, so we know that transport is heavily affected. Bridges have been destroyed, roads may be insecure, and that, of course, has a direct impact on our ability to deliver fast and at scale. We have also seen that infrastructure has been destroyed. For example, one of the Myanmar Red Cross offices has been completely destroyed. So when local responders have their own infrastructure affected, that, of course, impacts on the overall response. Now, in terms of insecurity, as you mentioned, in some areas, there are active contestations for the control of the territory, and that increases the risk for populations, but also for aid workers. One particular area of concern is with regard to mine risks. So there is quite a lot of explosive ordnance at the moment in Myanmar. And of course, with the rising flood waters, there's concern about those risks harming more and more civilians without their knowledge. An additional point to bear in mind is that the waters have affected areas in the center of the country, and as the rivers flow downstream, there might be additional impact on the populations that live in the south of the country. So that's also something that we're closely keeping an eye on in order to ensure preparedness measures.
And Nadia, before we go, what are the most urgent and immediate next steps that must be taken to ensure that a lot of the relief gets to the people who need it most?
Well, we would request that people find a way to support. First of all, people are able to support through in-kind donations to organizations that they know in Myanmar. A lot of organizations will be calling for funding as well, as we will be as IFRC. There will be, in most countries in the world, a local Red Cross or Red Crescent that can be supported through communities that are interested in doing so. The most urgent needs for now will be establishing a coordinated response, trying to organize between the different responders what they are able to contribute. As I mentioned, there's a lot of local efforts that are already being done, and thinking in the medium and long term. So there's a lot of local support coming for the immediate survival needs, and more will be needed in the coming weeks. Now, we know that when the media attention decreases, the amount of support may also decrease. So we do encourage this medium-term perspective to enable the recovery for those populations that have been most impacted.
Nadia, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. That was Nadia Khoury, who is a head of delegation of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and she's speaking to us live from Yangon.